February 26th, 1959. The northern Ural mountains groan under a weight of endless snow and silence. Searchers crest a barren ridge known by the Mansi people as Kholat Sayakal, Dead Mountain. The name feels like an omen. For several days they have scoured the icy wilderness for 9 missing hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, all young, all experienced. What they finally see in the fading light stops them cold. A tent stands half buried in the drift, its canvas stiff with frost. At first glance it looks almost ordinary, as if its occupants might return any minute. But the details tell a different story. The guy lines sag uselessly. One side is slashed open, not from the outside, but from within. The rescuers peer inside and feel their stomachs tighten. Boots, jackets, backpacks, food, even a neatly arranged logbook, all untouched, as though the hikers walked out mid-meal and never came back. Outside, the snow is strangely quiet. Then someone notices a faint trail of footprints leading downslope. Bare feet, a few in socks, some in only one shoe. They march in a single file, heading into the black timber below, as if the hikers fled together. But fled from what? No signs of a struggle, no avalanche debris. Just the eerie impression that 9 people calmly abandoned warmth and survival for the deadly night. The searchers follow the prints until they vanish under fresh powder. There is no sound but the wind, whispering across the mountain's frozen skin. Somewhere in this endless white lie the answers. But for now, the only certainty is that something drove these seasoned adventurers into the dark without their gear, without their boots, without reason. Within days, bodies will be found scattered across the slope and deep in the forest, some half-naked, others with injuries no storm could explain. Tongues missing, skulls fractured, flesh burned. Theories will multiply. Soviet military tests, secret weapons, Soviet special service execution, escaped prisoners, aliens, even a Yeti. But all that still lies ahead. Tonight, on this desolate mountain, the rescuers can only stare at the abandoned tent and feel the creeping sense that the mountain itself is holding its secrets. What terror, or command, forced 9 skilled hikers to slice their way out into a killing cold? The footprints vanish, the wind erases their trail, and the dead mountain keeps its silence. The Dyatlov Pass incident has begun. Before the mountain became a crime scene, it was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime. Their leader, Igor Dyatlov, was just 23, but already known at the Ural Polytechnic Institute as the kind of person you trusted when the temperature dropped and the map turned white. Methodical and charismatic, Igor had a reputation for careful planning. He could fix a broken stove in a blizzard or calm nerves when the trail disappeared. This journey, a 200-mile winter trek through the northern Urals, would earn the group the coveted Grade 3 certification, the highest level of mountaineering achievement in the Soviet Union. For young explorers in 1959, it was both a badge of honor and a ticket to more ambitious climbs. The team of 10 set out from Sverdlovsk on January 25, 1959. Alongside Igor were friends bound by shared classrooms and countless hikes. Zinaida Kolmogorova, 22 years old, bright and fearless, who scribbled witty lines in her diary. Rustem Slobodin, 23, athletic and determined. Lyudmila Dubinina, the youngest one, just 20 years old, strong-willed and sharp-tongued. Yuri Doroshenko, 21, known for his energy and good humor. Nikolai Thibault Brignol, 23, cheerful and reliable. Alexander Kolevatov, 24, a quiet, thoughtful physics student. Semyon Zolotaryov, the oldest at 38, and a last-minute addition. He had combat military experience during World War II. And Yuri Krivonishenko, 23 years old, the prankster with a camera always at the ready. A 10th member, Yuri Yudin, 21 years old, started the journey but never reached the final pass. On January 28th, plagued by knee pain and illness, he reluctantly turned back, a decision that saved his life. He would live 55 more years until 2013, haunted by the photographs and memories of the friends he never saw again. From the start, the trip had all the hallmarks of a textbook expedition. Their diaries and film reels capture easy camaraderie. Songs sung on cramped train cars, snowball fights during rest breaks, and affectionate teasing about frozen boots. They posed for group photos with broad smiles, the kind that freeze not from cold, but from sheer excitement. Each night they logged temperatures, adjusted routes, and meticulously documented their progress, proof of a team seasoned in the art of survival. The route took them by train north to Ivdel, then by truck to the logging settlement of Vizhay, and finally on skis through an empty land of black spruce and sweeping tundra. By January 31st, they reached the edge of the uninhabited wilderness. The next day, they began the grueling climb toward Mount Otorten, their ultimate destination. That evening, they camped in a valley beneath the looming ridge of Kholat Syakhl, a name the local Mansi people translated ominously as Dead Mountain. On February 1st, brutal winds and heavy snow slowed their ascent. Instead of continuing through the pass to a more sheltered forest, Igor Dyatlov chose to pitch their tent high on the exposed slope, a decision likely meant to practice advanced survival skills. The diaries mention no fear. They cooked a simple meal, cracked jokes, and took final photographs of a group wrapped in furs and optimism. The last entries speak of strong winds, drifting snow, and plans to push for Otorten the next morning. Nothing in those pages suggests the terror to come. No hidden enemies, no warnings of disaster. Just 9 young explorers, laughing into the cold, certain that their careful planning and camaraderie could conquer any mountain. When they zipped their tent closed that night, they believed the worst challenge would be the icy climb ahead. By the next evening, silence. Radio check-ins went unanswered. Days later, the first search parties would step onto the same slopes and find only a slashed tent, a trail of bare footprints, and a mystery that would freeze the world's imagination for decades. The Dyatlov expedition missed their scheduled check-in on February 12th. At first, no one panicked. Delays were common in the Ural winter. But as days passed with no word, families demanded a search. On February 20th, teams of students, teachers, and soldiers fanned out across the snowy wilderness. What they found would freeze even seasoned rescuers. On February 26th, a student named Mikhail Sharavin spotted a strange shape on the white slope of Kholat Syakhl. As he brushed away the drifted snow, a canvas wall emerged. It was the Dyatlov tent, half collapsed, partially buried, eerily silent. Inside lay every essential item of survival. Sleeping bags neatly laid out, boots stacked in place, coats, food, cameras, and diaries. Even the stove sat packed and unused. The only thing missing was the 9 hikers themselves. Sharavin later recalled, the tent was half torn down and covered with snow. It was empty, and all the group's belongings and shoes had been left behind. Investigation later confirmed something more disturbing. The fabric of the tent bore long slashes cut from the inside out, as if the hikers had fled in frantic haste. From the entrance, 9 sets of footprints, some in socks, some in a single boot, some completely barefoot, led away into the open night. The prints descended the slope for nearly half a mile before vanishing beneath fresh snow. They headed not toward shelter, but toward the dark line of forest below. Following the trail to the edge of the woods, searchers discovered the first grim evidence of the group's fate. Beneath a towering Siberian cedar, the remains of a small fire smoldered against the cold. Nearby lay Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko, stripped to their underwear, skin darkened by cold and exposure. The cedar's branches were broken 5 meters high, suggesting that one of them had climbed desperately upward, perhaps searching for the lost tent, perhaps trying to escape something unseen. Between the cedar and the abandoned camp, 3 more bodies were found at intervals, as if frozen mid-journey back up the slope. Leader Igor Dyatlov, skier Rustem Slobodin, and spirited Zenaida Kolmogorova lay face down in the snow, their positions hinting at a final crawl towards safety. Slobodin's skull bore a small fracture, but not enough to kill him. All five showed signs of hypothermia, yet the lack of outer clothing defied explanation. The mountain then guarded its remaining secrets for over 2 months. As winter hardened into spring, the search dragged on until early May, when a Mansi hunter's dog alerted rescuers to a depression in the snow-filled ravine beyond the cedar. Beneath 4 meters of packed ice lay the last 4 hikers: Semyon Zolotaryov, Lyudmila Dubanina, Alexander Kolevatov, and Nikolai Thibault Brignol. Unlike the first group, these bodies were more warmly dressed, wearing scavenged clothing from their dead companions. Dubanina wore Krivonishenko's torn, burned trousers. Her feet were wrapped in a piece of jacket like makeshift boots. The injuries told a story stranger than simple exposure. Thibault Brignol's skull was crushed by a force likened to a speeding car crash. Zolotaryov's ribs were broken inward without external wounds. Dubanina suffered the most haunting injuries: broken ribs, internal bleeding, and the complete loss of her tongue and eyes. Despite these violent traumas, the skin showed no defensive cuts or bruises, no sign of struggle. Autopsies deepened the puzzle. Some bodies carried inexplicable traces of radiation, enough to register on Geiger counters, but not enough to account for their deaths. Time of death estimates suggested the hikers did not all perish together, yet the footprints showed them leaving the tent as a group. Clothing on several victims contained elevated levels of beta radiation, though no source was ever identified. The contradictions multiplied. Hypothermia clearly claimed some lives, yet others died from massive internal trauma, more consistent with a car crash or an explosion. There were no external wounds to match the shattered ribs and fractured skulls. Investigators proposed everything from hurricane-force winds to avalanche, from Mansi attacks to military weapons tests, but none fit the evidence. Diaries and camera rolls recovered from the tent provided a haunting counterpoint. Their final entries describe laughter, songs, and a routine night's camp. The photographs, smiling faces against the frozen landscape, were taken just hours before terror drove them half-clothed into the howling dark. The mountain gave back the bodies, but not the truth. Each new discovery only sharpened the mystery. Why would 9 skilled hikers slice open their own tent and walk barefoot into a brutal night? What invisible force could fracture bones without breaking skin? And why, in the middle of the frozen wilderness, did traces of radiation cling to their clothing? By the time the last autopsy ended, the official report could offer only a chillingly vague conclusion. The hikers died from a compelling natural force. No further explanation was given. 60 years later, those words still hang in the icy air of Kholat Syakhl, an open verdict on a mystery that refuses to thaw. The discovery of the Dyatlov group sent shockwaves through Sverdlovsk Oblast. 9 young hikers, bright, experienced, and officially trained, had perished in a way that made no rational sense. The same day of the first bodies being recovered, Soviet authorities opened a criminal case. Soldiers, prosecutors, and forensic experts arrived at the base of the pass, but from the start, the investigation carried the faint scent of haste and quiet control. The first 5 bodies, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, Slobodin, and the 2 Uris, were examined in late February. Autopsies offered little satisfaction. The medical examiner noted no lethal trauma. All showed classic signs of hypothermia: frozen extremities, internal congestion, small abrasions, and odd patches of skin discoloration from the cold. Rustem Slobodin presented a small skull fracture, but the doctor ruled it non-fatal, possibly caused by a fall on ice. The official conclusion for these first victims was simple and chilling: death by freezing. That narrative shifted dramatically when the snow thawed in May, and the final 4 hikers were recovered from the creek bed beyond the cedar. Their bodies told a far different story. 3 bore massive internal injuries, more consistent with a high-speed car crash than a mountain accident. Nikolai Thibault Brignol's skull was fractured with a force likened to a hammer blow. Ludmila Dubanina's ribs were crushed inward, her heart and lungs ruptured. Semyon Zolotaryov suffered similar chest fractures so severe that the autopsy report described them as equal to the effect of a car moving at high speed. And yet their skin showed no external cuts or bruises, no sign of the blunt trauma that should have accompanied such damage. The soft tissue injuries added a macabre dimension. All 4 had lain for weeks in a shallow stream, and their faces bore the marks of water and ice. Dubanina was missing her tongue, eyes, part of her lips, and a fragment of skull bone. Zolotaryov's eyeballs were gone. Alexander Kolevatov had lost his eyebrows. The forensic examiner insisted these were post-mortem effects, tissue degraded by running water and scavenging animals. But the grotesque images fueled rumors of torture, or something worse. Despite the shocking injuries, the official line held firm. After a mere 3 months, prosecutors closed the case. Their final report cited death from an unknown compelling natural force, a phrase as opaque as the icy wilderness itself. No avalanche debris was found, no animal tracks, no evidence of an attack. Whatever had driven 9 skilled hikers to slash their own tent and flee barefoot into a Siberian night was left undefined, buried beneath bureaucratic language. The investigation's brevity and secrecy only deepened suspicion. Records were sealed. Witnesses recalled the quiet presence of military officers and men believed to be from the KGB, taking notes and giving curt instructions. Some rescuers later claimed they were warned not to speak freely. Equipment and clothing with elevated radiation readings were logged, but no source was identified. Families of the dead pressed for answers and were met with silence or vague assurances that the tragedy was a natural accident. Criticism of the inquiry came quickly and never really stopped. Searchers testified that key evidence, the sliced tent, the precise locations of the bodies, was poorly photographed and inconsistently recorded. Diaries and camera film were cataloged, but portions of the files vanished into classified archives. To this day, researchers struggle with incomplete documents and contradictory testimonies, fueling endless debate over what the investigators may have overlooked or deliberately concealed. Only one person who began the trek survived to read those reports: Yuri Yudin, the hiker who turned back on January 28th because of illness. He would carry the weight of survivor's guilt for the rest of his life. Yudin pored over every photograph, every diary entry, seeking meaning in his friend's final days. Until his death in 2013, he maintained that something beyond mere weather claimed the group. He alternately suspected secret weapons testing, escaped prisoners, even a government cover-up, but he admitted no theory fully explained the evidence. The truth, he once said, is hidden somewhere between the mountains and the government files. In the Soviet Union of 1959, speculation about military experiments or alien forces was discouraged, but whispers spread anyway. Villagers spoke of glowing orbs seen over the pass that winter. Rescuers noted strange orange discoloration on the hikers' skin and clothing. Geiger counters recorded radiation higher than normal background levels. Officials dismissed these anomalies as irrelevant, yet they added to a sense that something unearthly, or at least unacknowledged, had unfolded on Dead Mountain. By the summer of 1959, the case was officially dormant. The files were archived under a vague label and access restricted. Parents buried their children without knowing what had really killed them. A single line in the closing report attempted to draw a curtain over the mystery. The cause of death of the hikers was a compelling natural force, which they were not able to overcome. It was less a conclusion than an admission of defeat. More than 6 decades later, that phrase still echoes like the wind across the Urals, an official stamp on an unsolved tragedy, a puzzle frozen in time that investigators, journalists, and amateur sleuths continue to probe, searching for the force that drove 9 strong young adventurers into the night and into legend. In the decades since the Dyatlov hikers perished, scientists and outdoor experts have worked to explain the tragedy without resorting to spies, UFOs, or supernatural forces. Among the many ideas, 3 natural theories dominate the debate, each aiming to match the strange physical evidence with the merciless realities of a Siberian winter. The first and most widely discussed is the slab avalanche hypothesis. For years, investigators dismissed avalanche danger, noting the tent's gentle slope and the absence of a large debris field. But in 2019, a team of Swiss researchers revisited the case using modern snow science models and computer simulations. Their conclusion: a small, dense slab of snow could have broken loose just above the hikers' camp hours after they pitched their tent. This delayed collapse might have struck while the group slept, cracking ribs and skulls in an instant. Panicked, the hikers slashed their way out and fled downslope to escape a feared second slide. The injuries to the final 4 victims, massive internal trauma with minimal external wounds, match what a compact block of heavy snow might inflict. Critics point out, however, that rescuers found no classic avalanche debris, and the slope's angle was barely steep enough to sustain such a slide. Still, the slab theory remains the most scientifically grounded explanation. Another contender is the phenomenon of katabatic winds, ferocious downhill gusts created when cold, dense air rushes from a ridge or glacier. These winds can reach hurricane force with little warning, flattening tents and disorienting even seasoned mountaineers. If a sudden blast tore through the pass that night, the hikers may have feared the tent would collapse or be blown away. Escaping into the tree line could have seemed safer than waiting inside a fluttering canvas coffin. Once separated in the dark, the group might have become lost or unable to return against the gale. Yet katabatic winds alone cannot easily account for the crushing injuries found on several victims. A more subtle atmospheric culprit is infrasound, low-frequency vibrations below the range of human hearing. Some researchers propose that wind passing over the dome-shaped slopes of Kholat Syakhl could have produced a Kármán vortex street, creating infrasound capable of inducing intense fear, nausea, and irrational behavior. According to this theory, a wave of panic drove the hikers to abandon their shelter in a frenzy, after which hypothermia and disorientation sealed their fate. While intriguing, the idea rests on limited experimental evidence, and it struggles to explain the specific physical trauma. Finally, forensic experts point to the grim but common effects of hypothermia itself. In severe cold, victims often experience paradoxical undressing, removing clothes in a final burst of heat hallucination. Many of the Dyatlov hikers were found partially dressed or wearing each other's garments, a pattern consistent with hypothermic confusion. Some may have scavenged clothing from companions who died first, a desperate effort to survive. Hypothermia also causes terminal burrowing, a compulsion to crawl into tight spaces, which might explain why some bodies were found in a creek bed or under shallow snow. Yet hypothermia alone cannot create the bone-shattering injuries seen in 3 of the victims. Each natural theory answers part of the puzzle, while leaving other pieces stubbornly unmatched. The slab avalanche best accounts for the chest and skull fractures, but struggles to explain the neat condition of the tent and the lack of obvious avalanche debris. Katabatic winds and infrasound offer psychological triggers for the hikers' frantic escape, but neither produces blunt force trauma. Hypothermia explains the strange clothing choices and eventual deaths, but not the initial flight from a seemingly stable campsite. Perhaps the truth lies in a combination: a small, creeping slab collapse, followed by howling winds, disorientation, and the deadly cascade of cold. In the thin, brutal air of the Urals, several modest dangers may have converged into a single lethal night. Yet for every simulation and scientific paper, the question lingers like the icy fog on Dead Mountain. If nature alone was the culprit, why does the scene still feel so unnatural? If nature alone cannot explain the carnage on Dead Mountain, then perhaps the danger came from people. Hidden hands operating in the long shadows of the Cold War. From the very beginning, the Dyatlov case was wrapped in secrecy. Investigators opened a criminal file, but within 3 short months they closed it with a vague conclusion. The hikers died because of a compelling natural force. Key documents were marked confidential. Certain photographs and notes vanished into secret archives. Even relatives of the victims were denied full access to the findings. To many Russians, this was not the behavior of officials with nothing to hide. One of the most persistent suspicions centers on KGB involvement. 1959 was a year of intense geopolitical tension, with the Soviet Union guarding its military secrets and suspicious of Western spies. The Dyatlov group included several members with ties to engineering and physics programs, skills of interest to Soviet intelligence. Some theorists suggest the hikers accidentally wandered into a covert testing zone or stumbled upon evidence of classified research. Perhaps they witnessed something they were not meant to see, prompting a cover-up. While no direct evidence of KGB agents on the mountain has surfaced, the sloppy yet strangely controlled investigation, files sealed, testimony edited, autopsy reports redacted, has fueled decades of speculation. Linked to this is the idea of secret weapon tests. During the late 1950s, the Soviet military conducted experimental parachute mine trials and rocket launches in the Urals. Eyewitnesses from nearby settlements reported seeing glowing orbs and strange lights in the sky around the time of the hikers' deaths. Some suggest that parachute mines, devices designed to detonate above ground with a powerful shock wave, could have caused the internal injuries found on several victims. A mid-air explosion would generate massive pressure without leaving obvious external wounds, and could scatter debris far from the tent. Others point to small burns on clothing and traces of radiation on a few garments as potential evidence of a weapons mishap. Critics counter that the radiation levels were minor and could have come from the hikers' university laboratories, and no fragments of military ordnance were ever recovered. Closer to the ground, rumors also swirled around the Mansi, the indigenous hunters whose reindeer herds roam the region. Could the Dyatlov team have trespassed on sacred land or provoked a violent confrontation? The footprints leading away from the tent showed no sign of a chase, and autopsies found no defensive wounds from weapons or hand-to-hand combat. Mansi hunters themselves assisted in the search and were never seriously charged. While the story of an angry local attack makes for dramatic headlines, investigators found no credible evidence of a massacre. Another human threat could have come from within. The Ural Mountains were dotted with prison camps, and escapees occasionally roamed the wilderness. A band of escaped convicts might have stumbled upon the hikers' camp. Yet again, there were no tracks of outsiders in the snow, and valuables were left untouched. Strange behavior for desperate fugitives. Theories of an internal conflict among the hikers themselves have also been floated. A sudden fight, a romantic rivalry, or a mental breakdown. But forensic reports revealed no signs of interpersonal violence beyond the traumatic injuries, more likely caused by an external force. What remains most tantalizing is the Cold War atmosphere of paranoia. The Soviet Union of 1959 thrived on secrecy. Accidents, especially those involving experimental weapons, were often buried beneath layers of classification. Families of the dead were warned not to speak publicly. Even decades later, when the files were partially declassified, researchers found gaps. Missing pages, contradictory witness statements, inexplicable edits to the final report. The hurried closure of the case, the cryptic phrase, compelling natural force, and the quiet presence of military officials at the recovery site all deepen the sense that someone higher up wanted the truth obscured. Perhaps the hikers were collateral damage in a military test gone wrong. Perhaps officials, fearing international scandal, chose to blame the indifferent cruelty of nature rather than admit a deadly blunder. Or perhaps the state's reflexive secrecy simply magnified an ordinary tragedy until it resembled conspiracy. In the end, the human theories are as unsettling as the natural ones. They suggest not just an accident, but a decision, by soldiers, scientists, or bureaucrats, to leave 9 young lives unexplained. Whether through hidden weapons, bureaucratic negligence, or deliberate cover-up, the mountain may have claimed more than the hikers. It claimed the truth itself, locking it behind classified doors where, more than 60 years later, it remains stubbornly out of reach. When earthly explanations fail, the human mind often looks upward, or deep into the dark forests, for answers. The Dyatlov Pass tragedy is no exception. Among the most enduring theories are those that leap beyond the natural and into the strange. On the very night the hikers fled their tent, glowing spheres were reported in the skies above the northern Urals. Roughly 50 kilometers south of the pass, another group of mountaineers watched orange orbs drift silently across the stars. They described them as large, slow-moving, and eerily bright, unlike any known aircraft. Over the following weeks, residents of Ivdel and nearby villages, including meteorologists and even members of the military, claimed to see similar lights. Some glowed like distant suns, others flickered and darted in impossible patterns. None of these sightings were recorded in the original 1959 investigation. Only years later did witnesses come forward, their memories a patchwork of luminous shapes against the frozen night. To UFO enthusiasts, these reports are irresistible. Could the hikers have encountered an extraterrestrial craft? Perhaps the blinding light of a descending object startled them into a panicked escape. Some imagine a powerful energy discharge, enough to cause the internal injuries found on several victims while leaving the snow around them strangely undisturbed. A few point to the faint traces of radiation on clothing as evidence of a close encounter. Skeptics, however, note that the orbs might have been Soviet rocket tests, meteor showers, or even optical illusions caused by the thin, icy atmosphere. The orange glow could have come from distant explosions or the reflection of moonlight on high clouds. But the timing remains provocative. The night of the incident, 9 hikers flee without shoes, and strange lights dance in the sky. If not visitors from above, maybe the terror came from something ancient, something that stalks the taiga itself. Among the indigenous Mansi people, the Urals are alive with spirits and legends. Tales of a menk, a hulking creature of the snow, what outsiders might call a yeti, have circulated for generations. Some point to one of the last photographs on the hikers' recovered cameras, a grainy, dark figure standing between trees, shoulders hunched, as if watching. Was it a shadow, a member of the group, or something far more primal? A violent encounter with a creature of folklore could explain the frantic cuts in the tent and the desperate flight into sub-zero darkness. But no tracks other than the hikers were ever found, and the injuries, while severe, matched no known animal attack. Others propose a supernatural or psychological twist. The Dyatlov group spent days in brutal cold and isolation. High winds across the pass create a phenomenon called the infrasound, a low-frequency vibration capable of triggering panic and hallucinations. Could the mountain itself have whispered madness into their minds, driving them into a fatal frenzy? Diaries recovered from the tent capture a happy, joking team, but sudden fear can overtake even the strongest. Perhaps some invisible force, whether chemical, magnetic, or psychic, unraveled their reason in an instant, turning a routine night into a chaos of bare feet and broken bones. These stranger possibilities persist not because they are proven, but because the official story remains incomplete. The Soviet investigation was hasty and opaque. Key files were sealed for decades. Even today, contradictions linger in the evidence. Missing tongues, silent autopsies, unexplained burns, and the unforgettable image of a tent sliced open from within. Into those gaps the human imagination rushes, For many, the allure of an otherworldly answer is not about believing in aliens or monsters. It is about acknowledging that something extraordinary happened on Dead Mountain, something that resists tidy explanation. A UFO, a cryptid, or a supernatural force offers a narrative that feels big enough to match the mystery. It satisfies a need for wonder in a world that often demands dull, earthly logic. More than 60 years later, the Dyatlov Pass remains a riddle carved into ice and shadow. Whether the truth lies in the stars, the snow, or the restless corners of the human mind, the story endures because it invites us to imagine. And in that cold invitation, the mountain keeps its deepest secret. Decades after the 9 hikers perished on Dead Mountain, the Dyatlov Pass mystery refused to stay buried. Time only deepened the questions and sharpened the suspicion that someone, somewhere, wanted the truth kept quiet. In 1990, Lev Ivanov, the very man who led the 1959 inquest, broke his long silence. Writing in a Russian magazine, Ivanov admitted that his team had no rational explanation for what they had found. The tent sliced open from within, the bizarre injuries, the missing eyes and tongue, all defied ordinary cause. He also confessed that investigators themselves witnessed strange flying spheres over the Urals during the search. But when they reported these sightings, Ivanov said, orders came swiftly from Moscow. Drop the claim, close the file. His superior, Evgeny Okashev, later confirmed that pressure from above was intense. In a 2015 interview, Okashev recalled preparing a second expedition to examine the last 4 bodies when a deputy prosecutor general arrived from Moscow and ordered the case shut down immediately. Whatever forces ruled the Soviet Union in 1959, they were not interested in more answers. For decades, the Dyatlov file stayed locked away, fueling speculation of KGB cover-ups and secret weapons tests. Then, after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the case was finally declassified. Researchers combed through the long-hidden documents, only to discover that crucial photographs and witness statements were missing or incomplete. The gaps only fed the legend. In 2019, under mounting public pressure, Russian prosecutors reopened the investigation. Hopes ran high that modern science might succeed where Soviet bureaucracy had failed. But the scope of the new inquiry was telling. Officials announced they would consider only natural explanations, no secret weapons, no military experiments, no state or KGB involvement. Their list of acceptable causes was whittled down to 3: an avalanche, a delayed slab avalanche, or a hurricane. Evidence of military testing, strange lights, or radiation was quietly set aside. A year later, the results arrived with bureaucratic certainty. In 2020, the Russian government concluded that an avalanche, specifically a sudden low-visibility snowslide, forced the hikers to abandon their tent in the dead of night. Disoriented and ill-equipped, they succumbed to hypothermia before they could regroup. It was a heroic struggle, said Andrei Kuryakov, deputy head of the regional prosecutor's office. There was no panic, but they had no chance to save themselves under the circumstances. It was a neat ending, but one that convinced almost no one. Searchers in 1959 had found no debris or classic avalanche signature, and many experts noted that the slope where the tent stood was too shallow for a typical slide. Still, science kept pressing forward. Using new satellite imagery and advanced snow modeling, a team of Swiss researchers published a striking study in 2021. They proposed a slab avalanche, a rare phenomenon where a compact layer of snow can fracture and slide, even on gentle terrain. Simulations showed how a delayed slab release, triggered by wind and gravity, could crush the tent hours after the hikers set up camp, inflicting massive internal injuries without leaving obvious surface damage. The team even drew on computer models from the animated film Frozen to replicate the movement of dense snow. Their work suggested that a natural disaster, not spies or aliens, might indeed explain the broken ribs and skull fractures. Critics, however, pointed out lingering inconsistencies. Why were the hikers' footprints so clear? And why did the search party find no telltale snow deposits? While scientists debate and governments hedge, the pass itself has become a pilgrimage site. Hikers and thrill-seekers trek to the windswept saddle where the tent once stood, leaving flowers, photographs, and small memorials. Some carry Geiger counters, others cameras, all hoping to feel the same icy riddle the 9 students faced. Local guides lead expeditions across the same frozen ridges, their lanterns glowing like the mysterious orbs once reported in the sky. The story has seeped deep into global culture. Books, documentaries, and podcasts dissect every scrap of evidence. Feature films, from Russian dramas to Hollywood thrillers, reimagine the final night in lurid detail. Video games send players scrambling across virtual Urals, hunted by shadows and whispers. Each retelling keeps the hikers alive in a way. 9 bright young faces frozen in time, forever walking toward the unknown. Yet for all the theories, the Dyatlov Pass incident remains what lead investigator Lev Ivanov admitted it was from the start: a tragedy with no single satisfying answer. An avalanche, a military test, KGB execution, a UFO, or a chain of simple human miscalculations. Each explanation solves one piece of the puzzle while leaving others painfully exposed. Perhaps that is why the legend endures. In the cold silence of the Urals, certainty is as elusive as warmth, and the mountain still keeps its secrets beneath the snow. So after all the reports, the theories, and the careful computer models, we return to the question that first chilled the rescuers in 1959. If nature alone killed the Dyatlov group, why the secrecy? If an avalanche swept these hikers to their deaths, why were files sealed for decades, photographs misplaced, and witness statements quietly edited or removed? Why did Moscow send high-ranking officials to shut down the investigation after only 3 months? And why did the KGB classify evidence as if the fate of 9 students were a matter of national security? Even the Russian government's latest verdict, that a slab avalanche ended the expedition, cannot explain the political behavior that followed. No sign of a typical slide was ever recorded. The searchers in 1959 found no wall of displaced snow, no debris field, no clear trigger. Yet the case was treated like a state secret, a puzzle too dangerous for ordinary citizens to examine. Perhaps that is the real legacy of Dyatlov Pass. Whether the killers were snow, wind, or something darker, the tragedy reminds us that nature's raw power and human frailty often meet in silence, and that governments, too, can bury truth beneath layers of ice. We fear the storm, the avalanche, the invisible forces of the wilderness. But we also fear the locked file, the missing photograph, the quiet command from above. More than 60 years later, Dead Mountain still holds its verdict. The footprints fade, the tent sags under eternal snow, and 9 young hikers remain frozen between fact and myth. Proof that some mysteries are not only unsolved, but meant to stay cold.